Thanks. Oh, which one of these is going? That one? Hello? Yeah, great. Thanks very much. And Felix, thank you. Very, very inspiring talk. You didn't look how I feel, very humbled to be in the presence of such eminent environmentalists, and you have very good reason to do it, because you've done as much of any of us have by, whatever age you are now, by your young age. And it was really amusing for me to see your passion and your activism. I too started the journey that I'm on right now when I was still a child, when I was around 15. And I was keeping pigs at home on an empty farm, and I started feeding them on the food waste from my school kitchens, collecting the leftovers my school friends had turned their noses up at, turning that into pork, selling the pork, and indeed the eggs from my chickens to my school friends' parents, and making a bit of pocket money. And that was great, fun, tasty, delicious pork, never tasted anything like it. But it was also really shocking to me to see in every supermarket, every bakery, every single shop and restaurant I ever went to, such a colossal amount of food, and all of it being trucked off to landfill. And I realized actually that the bread I was collecting was tastier than the bread that my dad was buying at home. So I started eating breakfast with my pigs. And that moment, when I first started eating it, was really what I would say is the beginning of my journey. It was delicious, great, nice filling, organic, locally made loaf of bread. But it was also something that was making me really angry, the injustice of food waste. So when to my surprise, when I said that I was coming and the organizers asked me to give a talk this evening, I guess the purpose of that is just to say how and why I fixated on food waste and took it from the complete non-issue it was really only 10 or 15 years ago. The level of public awareness around food waste was zero. There were no stories in the press about it. There were no government policies focused on food waste, and big businesses were literally sweeping it under the carpet. They didn't talk about it. They were hiding it as far as they possibly could. Now, everything has changed. We have a United Nations global goal to halve food waste by 2030, a goal of which I was part of the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm a champion of 12.3, which is the goal to do that. We've had measurable mass behavior change on the issue of food waste. In the UK alone, 21% reduction in households. Not enough, but there are very few environmental mass behavior change movements that have been that successful. You cannot be a big food business without having food policies relating to food waste now. And of course, national governments have started to invest quite significant sums of money and initiative and talent into tackling the problem. So whilst the problem is by no means solved, the landscape on this issue has changed dramatically. So why is food waste so important? In and of itself, it's a colossal problem and a massive opportunity. About a third of all of the world's food is currently being wasted from farm to fork. And at the same time, we need to feed more people, and we need to reduce our environmental impact. And cutting food waste, as McKinsey, the consultancy firm, identified a few years ago, is one of the top 3 resource efficiency opportunities in the world. There's a lot of money in that mountain of 1.3 billion tons of food that are being wasted every year. There's a lot of resources that can be saved by doing that. So in and of itself, it's a big problem and relatively low-hanging fruit, relatively easy to solve, and the benefits are both social and environmental. So that's a good reason to focus on the issue. But there's another reason, and that is that food waste is not just a thing in itself, it's a symptom of another thing. It's a symptom of a food system that is at its heart fundamentally paradoxical and hypocritical. It is a food system which is currently dominated by the paradigm, or ideology we could almost call it, of productionism. It is a food system that we are being told by the Monsantos and Cargills of this world, and also, unfortunately, venerable institutions like the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, that what we need, notice the word need, the must in these quotes that I put up here, and I've picked a few at random from the many thousands of pages that are covered with this ideological premise. The idea that we need to double or increase by 50, 60, 70%, depending on who you're listening to, food production to feed all of those people that are going to be on the planet by 2050. The problem with this claim is not just that it's wrong, which it clearly is. We produce enough food already for 12 billion people. It's that if we actually did this, it would be the single biggest threat to long-term food security that there is. Doing this without a miraculous technological breakthrough, which is not impossible, but there's not even imagined or on the horizon, doing this by itself, even if we immediately replaced all fossil fuel consumption with renewable energy, even if we did absolutely everything else to save the planet, if we did this, we would already screw the planet. We would already go way beyond the 2 degrees of warming. Because the main way in which we increase global food production at present is extending the agricultural frontier into the world's remaining forests, cutting down all of those trees that Felix and his friends are busy planting, and turning those forests into fields to grow food for us. There is no technology on the horizon right now for massively increasing productivity in that way, and that is why Southeast Asia is being deforested, that is why Central Africa is being deforested, and that is why South America is being deforested. It is for food production. So, food waste, the fact that a third of all of this food that we already produce is being wasted, is a way of indicating that the food system is not designed to nourish the humans on this planet, let alone look after the environment. In some cases, those two things are a byproduct of the food system. The food system, by and large, is being driven to make profit. Now, profit is not in and of itself, obviously, anything to be criticized, but when it is being pursued at the expense of things that we really do need and we must have, namely a viable planet, there is clearly only one of the two that we actually need. We need the planet. We do not need massively more food production. I'm not going to dwell on this one for too long. It's a lot of data generated in the course of writing my book, but essentially what it shows is that all rich countries in Western Europe and North America have already on their shops and in their restaurants already have between 1.5 and 2 times the amount of calories than is actually required to feed their population a healthy diet. All rich countries have between 1.5 and 2 times. If you imagine a country that only has exactly the calorific needs of its population, it would appear on this line down here, 100% of requirements. It's not a good idea to only have that amount because you'll have some waste inevitably, you'll have some interruptions in supply, and you need to guarantee against that. So the bold line, 130% of requirements, is generally agreed to be a relatively robust and safe food system. So the idea that we need to massively increase that even further when already this is at the heart of both food waste and also the public health crisis of overconsumption, obesity and diabetes and all of those things that are being caused by increasing food availability. The idea that we need more of this, more Coca-Cola shoveling down our throats and down our children's throats, is obviously absurd. So how, as a food waste campaigner, have I contributed, as it were, to questioning, undermining, and challenging this issue? Food waste, of all the many, many problems in the food system, is just, it's one that people can get, whether you're a taxi driver in Freiburg or the CEO of Google or a government minister, you can grasp the idea that 1,000 tons of tangelo, citrus fruit, being wasted in Peru, where these are sitting rotting, a country in which there are hundreds of thousands of seriously malnourished children, that there is something clearly wrong with a food system that does that. We've all had that wilting lettuce in the bottom of our fridge. We all understand that there's something we can do about this, and that it's fundamentally wrong. So it's a galvanizing issue. I think it's even an issue that might be resilient to the post-Trump and Brexit era. So Feedback, the organization I eventually founded to campaign on this issue globally, one of the things that we do is go around the world looking into the supply chains of supermarkets and exposing the kind of egregious instances of waste that we find. And what we try to do is find the examples of food waste that really tell a story, the ones that are most kind of obviously stupid and wrong. This is an example because the reason why these are being wasted is not because there's anything wrong with them, but because of the minor skin blemishes that appear on the outside of the skin. And if you're having difficulty seeing the skin blemish that he's pointing at with his finger, that's kind of the point. They're almost invisible. They have absolutely no impact whatsoever on the quality of the fruit on the inside, no impact on the longevity of the fruit. It is purely a visual thing, and for this reason, the supermarkets for which these tangelos are being grown, the supermarkets in our countries, here in Europe and in North America, reject them. And the pork producers can only sell a certain amount on the local markets, and the rest is simply wastage. Whatever we think about Peruvians growing food for us, we can all agree that if they're going to do it, the last thing we should be doing is causing a third of it to go to waste. And it's, of course, not just a problem in Peru. We've been around the world doing this. This is in the UK, carrots that are too long. Hands up who grew up growing vegetables, or their parents grew vegetables, or and right, what did you, when you grew the carrots, you were trying to grow the one that was longer than your neighbor's, right? Well, in supermarket supply chains, anything that doesn't fit into their stupid packets, out they go. So in our quest to find like really juicy campaign material to confront the supermarkets with, this is a nice example. You'll notice two words on this packet of green beans. One is the word Kenya, the place from which these beans came, and the other is the word trimmed. Now, trimmed is obviously the cutting of the top and the tail. We all visualize a green bean in its virgin existence. It has a little stalky thing, doesn't it, at the top that sticks it to the plant. And pretty much most of us can agree we're not going to eat the stalky bit, right? It's kind of a bit woody. And then at the other end, there's a kind of wispy bit. And some of us, let's have a show of hands. Some people do, some people don't, no judgment implied. Some people eat them. Hands up who eats the wispy bit at the end. A few people eat them. But what we can all agree is that when we chop whichever piece we don't want to eat off, we chop it at the end of that bean, don't we? Where it's tapering. And what you'll notice, curiously, on these beans is some of them are cut where the bean is still at its fattest point. Now, why would Tesco, our biggest supermarket in the United Kingdom, do that? Well, the reason is because this punnet is exactly 9 centimeters long, and the beans didn't know they had to be 9 centimeters long. So they grow 10 centimeters, 14 centimeters. And indeed, these poor Kenyan farmers growing for our supermarkets, firstly, they have to throw away 30 to 40% of all the beans they've grown because they're too twisty, too fat, too thin, too bumpy, not green enough, all of those things. So they got rid of all of them. They've got their perfect straight green beans, and then 20% off. And there is no market for these green beans. All the reject green beans in Kenya, pretty much every single one goes to waste. At the very best, some of it gets to livestock feed. But it's Mzunga food, it's white man's food. They're not interested in eating it, and why should they? So they are being wasted. All of the land and the water and the habitat that has been used to grow these green beans is thereby wasted. Not only are the cosmetic standards one of the main issues that Kenyan farmers, and indeed farmers globally, experiencing, but they also, to add insult to injury, encounter the problem of order cancellations. So a supermarket gives a verbal indication of just how many green beans it wants from these farmers every 6 months. And they go out and they plant the green beans, and then that forecast only turns into a confirmed order a couple of days before the actual product is wanted in the store. And inevitably, the forecast is often at a variance to the confirmed order. Maybe British green bean growers have had a good season. Maybe Guatemalans are selling their green beans cheaper. Maybe we in Britain and across Europe aren't eating green beans that week because it's been raining and we don't feel like it. We want something else, burgers or whatever. And a lady like this, who's invested her time and her money and her land into growing mange tout, ironically called mange tout, because not a single one of these mange tout will actually be manged on this occasion, because her order was cancelled. These ladies explained to us that they're destroying an entire harvest of basil because an order was cancelled, and not a single leaf was being harvested. And they explained these are the people at the bottom of our supply chain. These people are working for less than $2 a day. They're landless laborers, and they get paid half wages at best when orders are cancelled in this way. They explained that this means that they can't send their kids to school, they might lose their homes, and they have difficulty feeding their children. This level of injustice that is piled on top of the resource implications of food waste is both horrific and also incredibly powerful campaign material, because not a single person that I've ever met thinks it's okay for Europeans to go to Africa, get Africans to work for free. It sounds familiar, doesn't it? Work for free, and then at their expense cancel an order that means that they're going into debt and they can't get any revenue from the food that they've produced. Well, as a result of the expose of this kind of egregious behavior, we did actually pass a law in the UK in 2013, called the Groceries Code Adjudicator Act, which now bans supermarkets from cancelling orders at the last minute. If they do so, and they cause a supplier to waste food and incur a loss, they can be fined up to 1% of their turnover, which is a massive fine on top of the public disapprobation that would come with such an eventuality. This, for us Europeans, thank you, Felix, for reminding me of my impending divorce from Europe, but I still care very much what happens in Europe, and we've had a campaign, we got a massive win in the Parliament, and the Commission is now taking seriously the idea of extending the UK law of this nature across the whole of Europe. Let's hope it happens. So, in order to challenge and confront what is clearly a borderline criminal food system, what Feedback has tried to do over the several years of its existence is to stand in the way with something that is joyful and celebratory on the outside. And our quintessential way of campaigning is to organize with coalitions of organizations around the world massive feasts where we feed thousands of people. My first ever one was in 2009 in London, where I fed 5,000 people out of food that would otherwise have been wasted, all of those wonky vegetables, and to communicate to people that this is a delicious and nutritious solution to a global problem. And the impacts of these kind of seemingly quite frivolous events have been colossal. The media coverage, the engagement we get means that not only is there a huge amount of public awareness and an amplification of public outcry, but typically in the wake of these big events that we organize around the world, supermarkets and other businesses will come to us and say, whoa, okay, food waste, what have we got to do? And about half of the time, they listen to us. So this has been an international movement that is now spread to every inhabited continent. Germany has had a huge food waste movement now going for years, and we are seeing a lot of improvement. By raising awareness, changing public opinion, you get stats like this, and that is what CEOs of big supermarkets don't like to see. So we get invited in, we tell them what we want them to do, and just sort of, we got two objectives in this. One, we want them to stop wasting food in completely ridiculous ways like the ones that I was just telling you about. So Tesco, when we took them the evidence and had made a big noise, they came back, they said, we're going to change this overnight, a few months later, which is overnight in supermarket terms. They said, okay, we're only going to trim the top off from now on, and we've got flexible bags, so it's a bit more, it's kind of flexible with the length. This, we found when we visited one of their suppliers, cut waste by 30% overnight. Something completely easy and stupid, and it cut 30%. But we felt that we'd only gone halfway, because they were still topping the beans, and even if they weren't topping and tailing. And last year, Tesco finally agreed not to trim. Am I going over time?
No.
Am I good? I've got a few more minutes?
5 more minutes.
Oh, I won't take 5. I'll take 4. They agreed to stop trimming at all, to sell whole beans. And guess what? They found that not only did this massively extend the shelf life of their beans, because it's when you cut the bean that you cause a damage to it, and that's when it starts going off, but actually customers preferred it. And it's just like, why do we have these things in our food system that no one wants, don't do any good to anyone, and are in everyone's favor to change? Well, it's kind of an example of both a way in which we go for pragmatic changes, but at the same time, what we've done is expose a company or a sector for the kind of malpractice that is actually entrenched in their whole business, with the hope that people might start thinking, actually, you know what, if they're doing that, I'm not sure if I want to give my money to them at all. Let's go and find some other way of building a food system and getting farms to produce food and getting it onto our plates. If we can imagine a little bit into the future, it's not inconceivable that an Airbnb of food will come around and smash the supermarkets in the same way that Airbnb has smashed the big hotel chains globally. A way of distributing demand and supply in local hubs that allows money and resources to transfer locally. This is not inconceivable. So how are we going to build the kind of positive momentum globally to make this happen, to transform the food system into what is the single biggest negative impact that humans have on nature, into what it could be, which is the single biggest tool we have for sequestering carbon in soils, creating habitat, creating livelihoods, nourishing people with accessible and good quality food? How are we going to transform that food system? Well, if you think about it in terms of like hospitality, if you advertise your kind of feast that you're going to hold and you say, well, we're all going to eat stale crusts and it's going to not have any meat and no dairy products, and we're not going to do this and we're not going to do that, there's not many people that's going to come to your meal. They're going to go to the one down the road where everyone's saying, we've got huge abundance, we're having a great time. Basically, if we're going to defeat the corporates that are destroying the planet, we have to have a better party than them. So that has been the objective of Feeding the 5,000, and that's the objective of my latest little spin-off, which comes from a moment of kind of real anger and disgust back in 2008 when I finally got an answer to the question I'd been asking, which is what happens to the end slices of loaves of bread when sandwich makers make their sandwiches just out of the inside slices? What happens to the crusts? And this was the answer I got: 13,000 slices of day-fresh bread from a single factory every single day, and that is happening around the world, and loads of similar things. In the same year, I was in Pakistan, 2008, remember? Wheat price spikes. Why? Because of an excessive demand on the global market, which affected the whole world. People in Africa and Asia buying wheat on the same world market that we do. We are taking food off that global market shelf and dumping it into our bins, contributing to that problem. So that really irked me. We did get this factories to stop wasting it and instead to feed it to livestock. They made £20 a tonne instead of a cost. They saved £100,000 a year, and obviously the resource efficiency. But it still really bugged me until I met a brewer in Brussels who was turning bread into beer. And I thought, other than making water into wine, that is a pretty cool thing to do. And so I said to him, look, it's really great. You're doing this brilliant beer. It's one of the many beers that you are producing in Brussels. How about I use my global food waste campaigning networks to make everyone in the world start drinking beer made out of waste bread? And he was down with this idea. So he came over. The first ever brew was put on with Jamie Oliver present. These are the very first bottles of toast ale, as it's called. Obviously, it's got to be called toast. I'm going to toast the end of food waste. Use your loaf. You can imagine all the puns that we have drinking this stuff. He said it's bloomin' good. Bloomin' is a name of a loaf of bread. Anyway, he's on TV drinking the first ever bottles of toast. I'm sitting there hoping he doesn't screw up his face in disgust. It turns out this is damn good beer. And you can get wasted on waste, which is a positive part of it. And then 100% of the profits from toast ale go to fund the charity I set up, the Feedback. So we're trying to do that thing of having a good time whilst trying to save the planet. I'll stop talking. Thank you very much.
Stay here. Well, thank you very much, Tristram. This was a fantastic talk. You are addressing a huge challenge, and you're to be applauded for raising awareness and that campaign. This is fantastic. And you're absolutely right. Also in Germany, it's a high visibility issue. And the other day, there was an opinion poll, and I believe 85% of the Germans say stopping food waste is one of the most important things. So, insofar, great success. Fantastic. On the other hand, the response to the challenge cannot avoid addressing the wrongly managed, steered agriculture worldwide, which is actually happy producing surplus. Why not? As long as they're paid for the first product, fine. Now, we cannot cover all that this evening. So let us first have a few questions, maybe for 10 minutes or so, on his talk and maybe suggestions. And in the Board of Trustees, we will discuss how then perhaps later address the more profound kind of challenge. Please. Any questions? Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting presentation. I agree with you that we always focus on increasing production, and we tend to neglect the side of consumption, which is really important, and you have already shown that. But my concern is the psychological barrier. It is a good idea and everything, but if we need to show in a transparent way that this food or this beer is made out of waste, you have to have this labeled, of course. How do you deal with the psychological barriers? Thank you.
That's a very good point. Obviously, one has to communicate very, very clearly, and we do. This is day fresh bread that would otherwise have been wasted. For example, the slice of loaf at the end of a set. People get that. They're not. That no one wants to be told, well, I don't personally mind, but many people don't want to be told they're eating out of a trash can. So you have to make that absolutely clear that the problem is not just food in bins, it's the fact that huge amounts of perfectly good food. And indeed, it's a selling point if you pitch it in the right way, in the same way that all of the work that we do. But you're absolutely right, overcoming that psychological barrier is an important one. And just to kind of segue from that point into the point about subsidies and the food system as a whole being geared towards overproduction, it is precisely by making people aware that overproduction is a colossal problem, underlies both food waste and overconsumption, that we hope to galvanize public opinion to the extent that the farm subsidy policies that exist in Europe, and even more of a problem in America, are so misguided. Anything that subsidizes overproduction with the public purse and at the expense of the environment is clearly absurd. But at the same time, it is that very fact that there are these enormous budgets available right now. I mean, this is the problem. Saving the planet through carbon tax requires populations to consent to new taxes, which very, very few countries in the world are ready for. We already have taxes that pay for farm subsidy bills. If we deploy them in sensible ways, namely use them to pay farmers to sequester carbon, look after habitat, etc., instead of paying them to do what is egregious and damaging to human health and the environment, that is a massive opportunity, and food waste has a part to play in convincing policymakers that we must do that. Sorry.
Thank you. Over here.
Well, dear colleagues, thank you very much indeed. My name is George Outer from Kenya, and with my wife here, I must say how much your presentation has called attention to something that I was not even aware of myself. And just like our young ambassador here, and I feel that I would be failing in my duty if I didn't acknowledge that, in fact, what you're doing is really saving some very hard-working Kenyan farmer, and therefore I think that I owe you a deep debt of gratitude on behalf of my country. But also to say that I hope that you will escalate this message so that it gets down to be known a lot more by the people in Kenya, and in fact, to a large extent, Africa, the kind of contradictions that food waste creates. So thank you very much indeed.
Can I have my slides back?
you.
Thank you very much. That's
Perhaps
really...
not needed directly to answer. We have another question. Paul Walker here.
My name is Paul Walker from Green Cross International. It struck me, one of our fundraising dinners banquets that we gave, called the Sustainable Awards in New York City a couple of years ago. We had a wonderful meal that was done by a famous New York chef, all from food waste. And it was really remarkable. And in front of each course, he got up and announced that it was the ends of breads, and it was thrown away salads, and it was on and on and on. It actually didn't sound very good at all. But in fact, the food was really delicious. And I'm wondering if you've been able to catalyze chefs and cooks around the world to really take this up and do public awareness raising and public events like this.
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, chefs getting behind any issue relating to food is obviously a huge potential, and Jamie Oliver is now working on his 5th series about food waste with us. Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall, who's like the one just below Jamie Oliver in the UK, has done an entire series, Feedback. I was his main food waste advisor. And now in the USA, as you say, it is kicking off like nothing else on earth. You're probably either describing Dan Barber or Sam Cass. It was Dan Barber. Dan Barber is currently in London, having taken his wasted pop-up from Blue Hill, which is one of New York's best restaurants, to Selfridges in London. I was with him on the stage at his dinner, eating gourmet, delicious food, all made out of food that would otherwise be wasted. And this is part of the trend that we've been trying to build for years. So yeah, absolutely, and very, very important.
Thank you. The gentleman in the center.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm very, very impressed by the presentation. But again, you did more research on the suppliers of the food, supermarkets. And I want also to know that what is your plans to continue with your campaign at the family level, especially in developed country where families put more food on the table. That's what they want. More food on the table, but compared to what they want, there is a lot of other excess of food on the table. How does your campaign continue to the family level?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So anyone who's seen any food waste figures might have heard that consumers are responsible for half or nearly half or more than half of all food waste. Don't believe the hype. These figures are generated by massively underestimating and leaving off the books most of the food waste at the industry level, and often inflating the food waste at consumer level by including things like tea bags and banana skins that are not really food. That said, clearly, a lot of food goes to waste in homes, and we all have a responsibility and the power, I believe, to solve one of these big, colossal environmental problems simply by eating and enjoying food that we have in our homes rather than throwing it away, thereby saving money as well as resources. So I hope that the messages that I go around the world spreading and that the movement that I'm part of has been pushing does hit home. There is evidence, good evidence, not enough evidence, but good evidence that people, when they hear this message, their awareness is raised, their behavior does change, and they eat food rather than throwing it away. But, you know, I think we all of us have a responsibility to kind of make that happen, not just me. So
Thank you. I have two more questions and then your answers, and then I'm afraid I have to withdraw, yes. But Rainer Grieshammer will be kind enough to take my seat. I have to take a night train to Berlin today. Please.
So I would like to relate to Kenya, because I'm actually just coming back from Kenya and working on water management and on planting trees. And finding my friends in Kenya suffering from drought and suffering from hunger. And knowing about this issue about the beans, and also for the German market, growing flowers in Kenya. So I'm wondering if you also came up with strategies to prevent this, what I would call not only a food waste, but also a land waste, because somehow the land there is wasted for growing flowers for us or beans for us. Yeah. But it should grow maize for providing ugali for the Kenyan people. So do you have ideas how to tackle that issue?
Well, there are lots of people who are arguing that we shouldn't import food from places where there are hungry people in need of the resources than the land and the water. And I personally have a lot of sympathy for that, and I prefer local and seasonal food for all sorts of reasons, and that's one of them. I will say that the most staunch defenders of the horticultural export industry in Kenya and anywhere else tends to be the farmers who are growing the food and making money by doing so and building themselves out of poverty as long as everything goes well. So what I think my solution to that difficult question is to say that if we are going to do it, then let's at least all agree that wasting a third of it is manifestly absurd. And if in the course of exposing just how problematic these supply chains are, how imbalanced, how disempowering, how polluting and environmentally damaging they are, some people conclude that they no longer want to have anything to do with it whatsoever, then that's a secondary objective that may also have been achieved. So I hope that doesn't dodge your question, but it is basically my strategy for dealing with it. And I will say that, you know, when we went to Kenya, and I've been 4 or 5 times now on these trips, Kenyans, you don't need to explain this issue to them. Well, this is one of our disco soup events. Anyone been to disco soup or schnipple disco? Got a couple of food waste activists in the room. This is the first disco soup in Africa. This is basically like our Feeding the 5,000 events. This is all food that would otherwise be wasted, but with music, DJs, bands playing, everyone's dancing around. Kenyans. Oh, okay, sorry. You saw it earlier on. Loads of Kenyans having a great time with loads of food. I didn't realize it wasn't behind me. Anyway, so they really kind of came alive to this issue as well. There we are. I mean, disco soup has been everywhere in the world, but I think one of the best I've ever been to was the one we organized in Nairobi. It was absolutely colossal. Sorry, I've been talking too much.
Hello, Tristan. Is this on?
Oh, I can hear you.
Oh, it is on. Thank you very much. Tristram, thank you for your talk. And I'm quite new to these topics, to be honest. And I'm also thinking about Felix's talk as well. And I'm a teacher, originally from Wales. The school food, not being rude, wasn't very good because we'd never had much money. Yeah. And the local government's always trying to save money. And I'm wondering, it's just an idea, have you ever thought about trying to take this, like Felix did to local government, to maybe turn around to actually try and get certain local educations or hospitals to say, we will take in the food waste, and would that reduce taxes for people if this food got consumed? If it's going to go in the ground anyway, would there be any way of it being used in public institutions?
Yeah. I mean, creating a market, secondary markets for food that would otherwise be wasted is a big part of our work. And yes, basically. But probably not enough. Probably not enough. I mean, probably not enough. And let's talk about it some more, because I could think about some ways of making it happen more. Yeah.
So any more questions left? Yes, please. Oh, yours a second. Sorry.
Hi. Is this on? Okay, now it's on. Thank you. Going back to how you were saying, if we were to get rid of all of the food waste, that would essentially increase the supply of food.
Yeah.
That could have all sorts of economic impacts, especially when you think about how a lot of the food waste is, when we're talking about farmers in the rest of the world, a cash crop for people. So if we take this back really far to the supply side of it, what will the impacts be on small farmers throughout the world who are dependent upon these cash crops? Is there any thinking about that?
So I think what you're saying is that if we stopped wasting the food and we used that food efficiently, then there would be less demand for the cash crops, and therefore some people would go without livelihoods. So this does not keep me awake at night, for the following reason. Firstly, a farmer who is able to sell 100% of their harvest, in our actual experience, usually makes more money, not less. Secondly, the global context of being told that we need to have more food available is the context in which this situation has arisen, and therefore worrying about there not being enough demand. I mean, we're so far from that being the problem that, again, I don't massively worry. And thirdly, in all honesty, my hope is precisely that ultimately what we do is lift pressure on food supply by reducing waste and reducing consumption, particularly of high resource using foods like meat and dairy products, in order precisely to shrink demand to within ecological limits, which is the one underlying basic necessity in all of this. We don't need Kenyan beans, we don't need so much meat, we don't need so much dairy, we do need a planet that survives, and we can't have that and massively increasing food production. So I don't know if that answers your point, but on 3 layers, I don't worry about farmers going without demand and therefore going out of business.
Okay.
But we can talk about it some more.
Yeah, we have hours and hours left, please.
I have just one comment and one question. One comment is that you say we should not import from those countries, but I think more important is to not export to these countries our cheap supplements and subsidized food. And my question is, you just mentioned dairy and meat. Are you addressing, because it's all about vegetables and bread, are you addressing animal products who are wasted in production and wasted on in the kitchen?
Yes. So, you know, some of our work is about, so for example, offal consumption. Offal consumption, the consumption of innards has declined by 30% in both the UK and the US. I don't know in Germany, but I'm sure it's declined a bit. And this means that, you know, all of this meat product is being produced, and then at very best it gets fed to pets. I mean, did we lose a... Sorry? Some of it does, and in fact, Gordon Brown, I don't know if anyone remembers Gordon Brown, he was the Prime Minister after Tony Blair for about 2 weeks or something. The one significant thing that he did is sign a bilateral agreement with China to export pig's feet from Britain to China. So the export of offal is definitely one of the things that happen, but pets get an awful lot of it. Why? This is like delicacies that our grandparents used to strive for, that other parts of the world, as I've just said, you know, import from our countries. So yes, it is. As I've said, the reason why we go for kind of green beans or kind of wonky tomatoes or whatever isn't because it's necessarily the single biggest thing that we have to change, but it's just, as I say, it's like the pinnacle of easily understandable, totally obviously stupid things that are going on that you don't really need to explain to anyone. And so that's why it kind of predominates in a presentation of this nature. But I agree, you can argue the toss. I mean, maybe we should be focusing exclusively on meat and dairy products, because not wasting them has way more environmental benefit than not wasting green beans. It's about strategy, and I'd love to hear further thoughts about it, comments about it.
There are 20 more questions, so I have decided 2 more questions.
Okay, 2 more.
Yeah.
That's good.
Is it on? Yes. We used to have a song in Germany from Reinhard May many years ago, The Battle on the Cold Buffet. You know the buffet where you have loads of food.
Yeah.
And I think this is something which spreads everywhere in Europe.
Yes.
That when you come together, you have masses of food, and people rush towards it, and you have mass of waste in the end. And I think this spoils also the behavior of eating within our countries. And in the end, you have this load of waste, and you are not allowed to feed it. You were not allowed to feed this stuff to your pigs because of hygienic reasons.
Yeah.
So they feed in the other end. They feed low food, bad food to the pigs, but you can't feed this waste you have.
Yes.
So I feel very bad with this behavior, and I think this is one of the reasons why we have this enormous bad way of eating, this enormous waste.
Thank you.
Abundance.
Thank you for bringing pigs in, because as I
you
mentioned,
said you had the pigs
that's where it started for
very
me.
difficult today.
What I did when I was 15 would, as the lady has just said, now be illegal, because in 2001, after the outbreak of foot and mouth, nothing to do with mad cow disease, totally different issue, foot and mouth in the UK in 2001, the European Union, first the UK, then the European Union decided to ban. Well, what they did is they said, right, okay, food waste is a vector, potential vector for disease, and the law used to be that you had to boil food waste in order to kill off all of the pathogens, but some farmers, because the law was not being enforced, broke that law and gave rise to the foot and mouth outbreak. So the UK and then the European government said, okay, well, there are always going to be lawbreakers, so the only solution is to introduce another law. Well, guess what? There are loads of lawbreakers still, and all of those pathogens in the food waste that is not now allowed to be fed to any livestock can be killed with this incredible piece of technology invented quite a few thousand years ago called cooking. And you just need to cook this stuff and it becomes fit for consumption. Instead of doing this incredibly risky business of cooking food waste, we do a very, very safe thing, which is to chop down the Amazon rainforest and import 40 million tons of soy to feed our livestock instead in Europe, which is obviously totally much, much more sensible and safe than doing what pigs were actually domesticated for several thousand years ago. Sorry, you mentioned pigs. You gave me an excuse to rant about them. I took the opportunity. But you're right. Eat as much as you like buffets, big problem. There have been some amazing projects that actually have stopped doing that and allowed things to run out, and then had little signs saying, the reason why we're doing this is because we don't like wasting food, or signs saying, maybe use a smaller plate, take less, come back for more if you need it. And people actually respond really well to that. So whilst there is absolutely a paradigm, it's a marketing ploy to pile food high. Supermarkets do it, buffets do it. This is the cornucopian abundance. Why? Because having invested billions of dollars into working out what is it that triggers the human response to take, put into trolley, zombie, go to till, pay for it, is one of the key triggers for that is an image of abundance. We all do it. I mean, we did it over dinner, right? There was loads of food there, so we ate loads of it. Because for millions of years we grew up in scarcity, and therefore to be confronted with abundance, the natural response is pile it high. That's the entire. But what we find is that actually frugal signs and those kind of explanations also trigger another thing, which is like, yeah, actually careful use of resources is a good idea as well. So they're competing business models. They're not either of them one inherently better than the other. In terms of getting people on board. Sorry, I waited a little bit too long.
So the very last question.
Yeah, last question.
And the last row.
We can chat some more afterwards. Let's go to the pub.
To the microphone.
Thank you very much for tackling this very important question. I'm actually wondering if you have a vision of an agricultural model that is meeting the needs we have in a sustainable way. And I mean, especially because we're talking about a systemic problem here, it's that we considering the food production as one of the, as a production way of an industrial sector, like producing cars, like we only considering the single product and not the whole farming. So I'm wondering if you have any vision of an agricultural model that is sustainable in the long term.
An agricultural model that is sustainable in the long term, and, I would argue, which needs to, in order to take root now, we haven't got 20 years to sit on our hands. Climate change is upon us. Deforestation is accelerating. This is something that needs to be taken up, like, in the next 5 to 10 years for it to really make the difference we need it to. So it needs to be able to compete with the supermarkets as the principal provider of food for the human population, particularly in rich countries, and to do so, it probably has to be able to compete on price and on convenience. So is such a food system, one, conceivable, and two, actually potentially going to happen? I think the main, and this is the best question that has been posed, we campaigners have been awfully good at attacking, criticizing, undermining, and exposing the hypocrisy at the heart of the system that is destroying the planet. And we have perhaps been less good at building the thing that we need to have in its place. And so I don't have the answer to your question, but I will say that in the last few years, I've begun to believe for the first time that it just might be possible. And the reason for that is not just the awareness raising, but I see systems, and I don't think any of them have quite got it yet, but you probably have an equivalent of this in Germany. So anyone heard of HelloFresh and Blue Apron? These are the companies that deliver to your door all the ingredients required to make a meal for your family. Is that a familiar concept to you? So instead of going to a supermarket, being blindly assaulted by food from every part of the world, and sort of filling your trolley at random, and going home and finding that actually week after week after week you've bought 20-30% more food than you can eat. This is like going to give you just the amount of food you need to make a meal for your family. So inherently, it's less susceptible to waste at the home. But even more excitingly, because the people deciding what goes into that menu are in direct contact with the suppliers of their food, when there is a massive glut of cauliflowers, as there is in the United Kingdom right now, everyone is complaining in the United Kingdom, you got it here too, about a courgette crisis. There's not enough courgettes on the market. Courgette season was 6 months ago, and people are worrying about courgettes. Meanwhile, our farmers are plowing entire fields full of cauliflowers back into the land because they can't sell them because the weather has just meant there's a glut. A system of the type that I've just described that is able to respond to the natural phenomenon of glut and say, right, cauliflower soup in everyone's, or cauliflower, whatever, thousands of different recipes, in everyone's box schemes this week, that is a system that, that I can see potentially working, and combine that with a kind of CSA model. I'm part of something that is called Our Field, where we don't just pre-own the grain that is in the field, we're actually co-deciding how it's farmed. So do we want to add fertilizer or not? Do we want to co-crop some other, all of these different things. Those things are beginning to be conceivable, and I mentioned Airbnb. I think that it is now possible for a platform to exist that would compete on price and convenience and be inherently better than the supermarket system that we currently are completely dominated by in Western Europe and North America. I don't know if that answers your point, but I've tried.
Thank you very much. So, very obviously, we have not wasted our time. And I would like to give some gifts to our two presenters. How old are you, Felix? 19. So we have wine, alcohol-free. No, the alcohol-free wine is now for you. And this is for you. So thank you very much again for both of you.